Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first ever episode of Monocle Moments. My name is Jaap van Beek, aka James Monocle, and in this podcast I talk to the most interesting people I can possibly find, and I dig as deep as I can to bring you a fascinating listening experience. Now in this podcast today, I'm talking to none other than Rachel Knight. Rachel has been one of my very best friends for many years now, and she's one of the smartest people that I personally know. In this conversation, we get into some deep psychology and mental health related items, but we also discuss our favorite books and some powerlifting. Now, she currently has an honors BA in psychology, a master's of science in applied psychology, and she's got a couple of years of working experience in both clinical and research settings. Now, she's planning to start to do a PhD in September. Once she's finished that, she's going to do a doctorate in clinical psychology. Very impressive. However, we do want to put a disclaimer out there, which is that despite the fact that Rachel has extensive knowledge and experience, she's smart enough to know that she may not know everything, so she is happy to take correspondence relating to any unconsidered viewpoints or research that may change her perspectives. Now, if you yourself are struggling with a mental health problem, we would advise you to contact your doctor or talk to someone you trust, but please know that we are no substitute for a trained professional. With all that being said, please enjoy the first ever episode of Monocle Moments with Rachel Knight. All right, it's recording. Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show, and welcome everyone to the first ever episode of Monocle Moments. So, as you all know, my guest is Rachel Knight, one of my best friends for a very long time, and ever since I started thinking about making the podcast, which is a little over a year ago, I wanted you to be the first guest, but I've just never told you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So tell me more about what made you want to do this podcast, because I thought that this was just you were in lockdown and you'd run out of things to do, so you were like, let's make a podcast. But it's good to know you've actually had some more thought behind this than I thought.
No, I've wanted to do this podcast for a long time because one of the things I love doing is talking to people. That's why I always call you endlessly, and some other people are on that list too. And I think in the end, I learn most from talking to other people. And I realized that maybe it would be fun to share that with more people. And I also just love listening to podcasts myself. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take part in the scene.
That's true. I do love a podcast.
I also love that the first question on the podcast was asked to me instead of me asking it to my guest.
Well, this is the thing, because, I guess, okay, maybe I'm the first guest, but, you're also kind of the first guest because it's your first one, so,
Very right.
I think it's important that people hear a bit about you, if you're going to be the one hosting it.
This is true. So, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us an introduction here.
So I guess I've lived a bit of an interesting life so far, or not that interesting, but moderately.
It's pretty interesting, trust me.
I'd say moderately interesting, not as interesting as it could be, but so I was born in the UK, and then I moved to France when I was 13, moved to Ireland when I was 18, and studied psychology, and then did a master's in psychology. I'm now kind of working as a research assistant in the cognition and brain science unit in Cambridge, doing some pretty cool work, and I've worked as an assistant psychologist as well. So I'm kind of at that point in my career where I'm pre-doctorate and hoping to start some kind of doctoral level training soon. On the side, I watch a lot of Netflix, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I also do, I'm a competitive powerlifter, and yeah, I think that's pretty much all there is to know about me.
And there's some things in the pipeline, right? That's definitely something I want to mention.
What kinds of the things? Career-related things? Powerlifting-related things?
Both.
Oh, I mean, look. Yeah, I mean, I guess at the moment, for the career stuff, I'm in kind of a weird position, because it was always my dream. I always thought I was going to do a doctorate in clinical psychology, and that's the thing I've been focused on even since I was in my master's the last few years. Just been thinking about getting onto clinical training, because it's quite difficult to get on in the UK. Only about 15% of people get on every year.
That's very few.
And
yeah.
and you have to apply probably for 3 or 4 years before you'll get on. So all I've been thinking about is doing that and getting towards that. And then this year, so I started the new job at the Cognition and Brain Science unit in September, and one of the things in my brain when I started was, nope, I'm not going to do a PhD. I don't want to do a PhD right now. I just need to do the clinical doctorate. That's like, I need to focus on that. I need to do that 3 years of clinical training. Like, I need to get to being a clinical psychologist. And then 2 months into the job, decided to apply for a PhD because I love to make myself suffer, I guess. But yeah, so applied for a PhD at the University of Cambridge and got it, but I'm still waiting on funding. So to get a PhD, first you have to be like recommended to the university to do a PhD, and like you have to be offered it, but then you have to wait to make sure that there's actually the money for you to do it. And we should have heard by now, but given the present climate, everything's taking a little bit longer. Science is kind of it's kind of chaotic right now. And kind of a big mess.
I suppose it has quite some impact on being able to do experiments, especially.
It really does, especially for us. All of everything that we do is human subjects. So, so there's one part of my job that's pretty much completely stopped at the moment. That's the part where, so it's one project that I'm on looking at emotion processing in young people and also their social cognition. And so that we were going into schools and testing. The best way to test for that is more efficient to do group testing. So you test maybe 12 kids at once. And we obviously can't do that at the moment. So that's completely stopped. Luckily, the other part of my job is another project that we've got in the pipeline, which is going to look at a particular psychological technique and how it might impact on emotion processing in young people. Which will be really cool. And we're also going to look at the neurological effects of that.
So can you expand a little bit there, emotion processing in young people?
So at the moment, it's part of a bigger project which has been about mindfulness and resilience in adolescence. And the project that I'm working on at the moment is seeing if there's a particular part of mindfulness which always comes out as in the literature as being important or being a real key component, and that's something called psychological decentering.
Okay, can you unpack that for the people that don't know what it is?
Yeah, so I guess in a lot of psychological therapies, this thing exists, but it's called lots of different things in different ones. So in acceptance commitment therapy, it's called diffusion. In CBT, it's called psychological distancing. And all it is creating psychological distance between yourself and your thoughts. So instead of you're having the thought, I'm useless, I'm never going to succeed, you create that distance between yourself and your thoughts, and you think to yourself, okay, so I'm noticing that I'm having this thought that I'm useless, and I'm noticing that I'm having these thoughts that I'll never succeed. And even that, you can see how it creates a kind of a distance between yourself and your thoughts. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And that can be a very easy way of managing negative emotions, because I think it would be the idea that you can make negative emotions go away, or that you can in some way control your emotions, is just from everything that I've read and from everything I've experienced, I think not true. The only thing you can do is learn to manage your negative thoughts and feelings better. I think it's something that's especially poignant right now in the present climate. Lots of people are stuck at home with their thoughts, and for that reason, me and my supervisor, Dr. Mark Bennett, are actually writing an article about psychological decentering for one of the kind of the big broadcasting newspaper in Ireland. So we're going to try and get decentering to the masses a bit if we can at this time. But yeah, so we're working on that, and at the moment we're very much in the pilot stage of that project. So we're doing a lot of piloting, there's lots of small things that we need to get done, and it's
could you give some examples, the kind of things you're working on then now?
So at the moment I'm working on the way we're going to do the project is we're going to have an experimental group who do the decentering training, because we're trying to figure out if we can do like a 6-week training on this creating psychological distance and whether it makes an impact on mental health or resilience or a bunch of other things. And the way that we're doing, so we're going to have an experimental group and a control group. And the experimental group, we need lots of different exercises and lots of different ways of practicing the psychological distancing. stuff, and so I'm writing those at the moment, or looking them up from other studies, trying to write them all down, and then at some stage I'll have to record them, because we're going to do them sort of like a podcast. We're going to podcast the exercises and have people do them every week, so I'm just trying to get those together. We're also including some mindfulness elements in that, so we're trying to get those exercises together, so and then some kind of more boring nuts and bolts stuff, so trying to get together like a list, like a protocol of what are all the things we're going to do. It's lots of different stuff, so in some ways it's good that I've got all that to do.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So you just mentioned dealing with negative emotions, and then the concept you just talked about. Are there any other ways that you know, or from the research you've done, that work especially well in dealing with negative thoughts?
Well, some of it's down to, I think a lot of it is down to philosophy more than anything, like your philosophy about emotions and how you experience them. Because I think a lot of the time people very much can have an idea that it's that idea of I can get rid of my negative feelings and thoughts. I can get rid of those. I can make myself not have them, or I can change them. And I don't think that's particularly representative of the human experience. I think it's incredibly difficult to get rid of negative thoughts and feelings. And a lot of our bad habits, a lot of the things that we do are actually things that we're doing to try to get away from negative emotions. So things like not just watching 2 episodes of TV, watching an entire series of TV. We all do it, and this is the thing. This is not coming from a place where we all do it. Like watch an entire series of TV, so that you don't have to think. Having a glass of wine or 5, like so you don't have to experience your own emotions. A lot of things we do are actually just kind of running away from, or trying not to feel our negative emotions, because they suck. They're difficult to deal with. They're really tough. But I think, there's a certain amount of it that's just about thinking about how negative experiences and emotions are part of the human condition, and they are normal. Like, it is, to an extent, it is normal to feel anxious. Like, I think, obviously there's a limit, but like, it's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel sad. It's normal to feel completely discombobulated especially at the present time. So I guess some of it is just thinking about how you relate to your negative emotions.
And so if you get negative emotions, I'm sorry to just stop you there for a second. Would you agree with the statement that the moment that you have negative emotions, you kind of have to face them straight away and go through them? Or is that inaccurate? Because I hear some people on the internet talk about it, like the moment you have something negative or something like that, you have to face the emotion and just experience it completely, and then it will go away.
I think yes and no. I think sometimes that's true. Like, I think, there's kind of a prerequisite to this in that you've noticed that you've had the negative emotion. And a lot of people actually aren't that in touch with their emotional state. So they kind of, something bad, or they'll start to feel bad, and it's almost automatic that they'll start doing something to make it go away. So like, just example, like you've just gone through a really bad breakup, and you're having a day where you're feeling like, you're not feeling so good. So you download a dating app. And you don't even realize that you're doing it to like, to get away from the negative feelings that you're having, but you are. So I guess, I think a lot of the time it can be helpful to kind of sit with the negative emotion. However, I think that there are definitely limits to that, and I definitely think that there are moments where that's not safe. So for example, something like distraction, which I've talked about a bit. So this idea of like, watching a few episodes of TV or going to the gym, or like those distraction techniques can actually be very useful if it's in the context of, if I don't do this, I'll hurt myself, or I'll relapse, or I'll do something that's bad. Then I think it's all about being able to use techniques flexibly. So distraction in itself isn't bad, but if you only ever use distraction, if you're only ever trying to like distract yourself from your negative emotions, it's not going to be good. And if you always face your emotions 100% all of the time, I think to an extent that becomes bad because you have no other strategies. It's all about I think it's all about being flexible with what you do, but I think to an extent, I think the idea of kind of facing your negative emotions it's not wrong. Like it's definitely the case it's definitely sometimes the case, but not, I wouldn't say always.
Okay. So, if you feel comfortable, I'd like to talk a little bit about your own journey in terms of mental health. Mm-hmm. Would you be comfortable sharing just your experience?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess I was always an anxious kid. I was like, since I was very, very young, I remember always worrying about things much more than other people did. And thinking about things a lot more than other people did. To a point that like wasn't kind of normal for the age that I was. Or I don't know, I mean, maybe it was, but it always felt everything was, I was also very kind of, I was very in touch with my own emotions and everyone else's. Like, it really distressed me to see anyone else distressed, like, to a really high level. Like, to an extent, I figured out recently something about why I don't like horror films, because I've never liked horror films. I just can't manage them. And I figured out that one of the reasons that is, I mean, to an extent, like, I kind of don't really enjoy being frightened and all that, but I find it so distressing to watch other people be frightened. I just cannot.
I empathize with that so much.
I actually just can't manage it. It's too much for me. And like it's really like overstimulating in a way for me. So like, I guess I always had that even when I was a young kid. Like to the point that, you know, and then I think I was about 14 or 15 and I looked up depression and I'd never heard of it. Like, or like it was like the first time I was kind of hearing about it, and I looked up and I looked up the symptoms and I was like, oh, I have all of these. Okay. Right, so then kind of was dealing with it by myself until I was about 16, and then ended up finally telling my parents about it, and was able to go and see a really great psychologist, and saw a psychologist for a couple of years, got a lot better, went to college, was pretty much well for all of my first year of college, and then just because of a lot of stressors and various stuff going on, a lot of kind of relationship stuff, a lot of stuff about the way that I related to other people. I've always been a helper, but I was taking on a lot of relationships that were pretty much just all about me helping the other person and never getting anything back, and then me getting increasingly distressed by that. And them asking for increasing amounts from me to the point that I wasn't able to manage my own stuff. So I guess lots of stuff around that, and then kind of my mental health then started to deteriorate in second year, got to the point halfway through third year where I really had a complete breakdown. I still, funnily enough, I was always a very high functioning depressive, like very, very high functioning, was able to finish college, lots of people aren't, but yeah, I kind of, there was a point in my third year of college where I was like, I don't know if I can keep going. I might need to take a year out. Managed to keep going anyway. Thanks to a lot of great support from my parents and I was lucky to be at a university where we had really good access to psychology resources, and then kind of from then started getting better. And yeah, pretty like, I mean, I think kind of pretty much am sort of fully recovered now. I was on, in third year, I started taking citalopram, like an SSRI, which I found very, very helpful. It really helped me sleep and then helped my energy levels get better. And came off that about this time last year. So yeah, I'm like a lot better now, but then that doesn't mean that I never feel sad, and that doesn't mean that I never feel anxious or stressed, but when I do now, I firstly have the tools to manage it, and I also have it's like to a normal level that you would expect,
Yeah.
rather
so
than being all the time.
I'd like to mention two things. The first thing is actually that when we got to know each other, how old you were? Maybe 16.
I was 17 when we met.
Yeah, so we hung out for what, like 2 years before you went off to college, and I think that wasn't, in hindsight, maybe your best time, even though, like you said, you're a very high-functioning depressed person. You got the highest grade in high school. You were the smartest kid. You're still one of the smartest kids I know. That's why I love talking to you also so much, because you just have these interesting insights. And then, the thing I was going to say is that even though I knew and you told me, like in all of my interactions with you, I didn't necessarily notice it in the way that, like if you read about depression, you see it a certain way. But whenever we were hanging out together, I felt so at ease and comfortable. I have no idea what that adds to the story, but I felt like mentioning
it's a really interesting insight. I think mental health stuff is, I was very lucky in a lot of ways, because when I was in school, like my mum was always there. Like she was always, like I had a parent at home who wasn't working a lot, and also after that my dad stopped working, so I had two fully engaged parents. We weren't the kind of family where I could just not come, like not go to school or not sit at the table for dinner. Like it just wasn't that sort of family. Yeah. I think I really struggled for a period in my second to last year of school where I sort of was developing some pretty disordered eating habits. Like pretty much starving myself, like was trying to not eat at all, but I couldn't fully get away with it because my family were just not a family where I could not have dinner, like, or not, not engage in kind of going out for dinner or going places. So in some way that really supported me and meant that even when I was at my worst in school, I couldn't really, sorry, one sec. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I guess in that way I was always very lucky. Also, to be honest, I was lucky to meet you because you had such like a good energy, and like you always, to be honest, like, yeah, I don't know, I always worry about what would have happened if I hadn't met you, because like I was so withdrawn, like, before I met you. Too sweet to me there. No, honestly, hey, I'm just telling how it is. Like, you know this. Like, at least once a year, I'm like, thanks for being my friend. Like, you completely actually saved my life. Like, because I guess before I met you, I was very withdrawn at school. Like, I wasn't really, like, I had a couple of friends, but I wouldn't really engage with people. I spent all my time in the library. I never left the library. And you're the only person who was able to, like, I mean, you didn't quite have to pick me up and put me over your shoulder, but like, yeah, like you were the person who was like, come on, let's go outside. Like, let's go and do this. Let's go and do that. Like, you always had so much energy. I think it was easier for me in a lot of ways because
I'm really glad to hear that. That's nice.
Yeah.
But I think I still feel like I have to just quickly rectify what I said earlier because it came out a little bit wrong. What I think I meant to say is that knowing what was going on with you throughout, I guess I was maybe less worried than some people might feel like they have to be, because I had so much kind of like faith in you. Yeah, just that, full stop. I just had a lot of faith in you and how you were doing things and working on yourself. And I think that's a good segue to one of the things that interests me a lot is kind of like, okay, so how much can you actually influence something like this? Like how much of it is, for instance, just tools you're using, and how much is just like, okay, it's bad luck, you happen to have this brain, and so you're going to feel more depressed?
I think it's a lot of things, because I think I was incredibly lucky in a lot of ways. Like the family stuff I was talking about, so like having that structure and that support around me. My mom was like, my psychologist said to my mom she needs to exercise, so we started going to these like exercise dance classes at this gym near us, and that helped a lot. So So that helped. I was lucky enough to be in a family where I had the money to see a private psychologist, a private English-speaking psychologist in the south of France, which is, it's no joke. It's not cheap. So I was, in those ways, I was incredibly lucky, because I think a lot of recovery and management of mental health is down to having access to psychological services, having access to exercise, having a good support system around you, and those were things that I was really lucky to have. And I think to an extent, I think there are people who are more prone to depression and people who are more at risk in their mental health, and I absolutely agree that that's the case, and there are biological factors, but I think a lot of it can be managed, but it depends on your resources, it depends on what's available for you. So I was just lucky, I think.
So looking back at yourself, if you kind of have to apply the more 80-20 kind of rule of thinking, what do you think maybe the 2-3 things that made the biggest impact?
I think social support. I had some people who were really shit in my life, but I had some really amazing people who really kept me going. And my family as well. So when I was in third year of college, during my exam season, my mom came over just for a few days, and just even small things so one of the days when I was out of college, she tidied my room, which was I was referred to it. So when my mental health's bad, I always refer to my room as my depression crevice, because it'll just be clothes all over the floor, sheets haven't been changed in months, takeaway boxes everywhere because I just can't cook. Just so she tidied the depression crevice, and even that, even something so small like that can it can make such a difference to someone. And she filled up my fridge with ready meals and stuff, so that I a kind of healthy ready meal, so that I had stuff to eat. I had just even small things like that were so helpful. So I guess that social support would be huge for me. Exercise is huge for me, and I'm not someone who thinks that mental health difficulties can be cured with exercise. That's just not me. But I think exercise is just incredibly... Even I've seen in the last few weeks how my mental health has deteriorated not being able to lift weights. Just exercise so important, and as much as possible just keeping up a routine. So it's really hard. Sometimes you need people to help you, but making sure you keep up a routine. And also sometimes, frankly, medication. It can help so much. Obviously it doesn't help everyone, and it's not a fix-all at all. Always, if you're going to be on medication, see if you can get some kind of psychological intervention as well. It works much better that way. But sometimes medication can really help.
Just jumpstart it, so to say. Yeah,
it really, even for me, it just made me sleep better more than anything. And it was it was coming out of a lot of people who who've experienced this, they'll talk about brain fog. When you can't think, you can't make decisions, you can't study, you can't think. And it cut through the brain fog for me. So I was actually able to think for the first time. So I was actually able to kind of battle the thoughts better in some way, or manage the thoughts better.
And do you think medication should be a longer term thing, or do you always think it should only be this amount of time and then you should try without again?
I think it varies, depends on the person. So some people only need it for a short time, or it can be incredibly useful. One of the things my psychologist used to say was she'd always recommend it if people were in a very bad situation that they couldn't get out of. So someone close to them had just died, they were in a really maybe abusive household, they can't get away from any of this. She'd be I think then maybe that might be the right thing. So some people only need it a very short term. For me, there was a natural point where I felt that I could try without it. The right sort of time to try this, by the way, folks, is when the sun's coming back. So around this time of year, they always recommend that you come off it as the sun's coming back, because winter is like
More
it's a
depressing.
depression breeding ground.
Is it actually?
Anyway. Yeah, well, like, I mean, I think lots of people find they feel lower in winter because of the sunlight and the vitamin D. So a lot of it is, I think there's a lot of research about that. Yeah, just because it's dark all the time. People don't function
so you
well.
should supplement on vitamin D, or is that not?
Yeah, I have a very good friend who's a doctor. She's a GP. She's an excellent GP. And she would always recommend vitamin D supplements, especially if you're living somewhere where there's not that much sun.
Like England or the Netherlands. Like
Yes,
ourselves.
exactly, like England or the Netherlands. But yeah, she would always recommend a vitamin D supplement. Just it can't hurt. And so yeah, people recommend that if you're going to come off an SSRI, you do it this sort of time of year. But some people need to stay on them. Some people try to come off them and it just doesn't work. Or some people are on medications. Also, I'm only really speaking right now about SSRIs, which are only the frontline intervention. There's lots of other medications, your tricyclics, your antipsychotics, your lots of other things that I can't speak about. I don't know, because I don't know the research. So I guess it's all down to the person. And I'd say just make sure you get a lot of advice. Don't do it by yourself as well. Go to your GP, go to your doctor, and make sure you're getting help. Yeah, and I did the same. And make sure also, for the love of God, do not stop all in one go. Like, taper slowly.
Okay.
Slowly does it. Yeah.
So I actually have a question about that, because I saw on your LinkedIn that you've done quite some help call center kind of like psychological help things. Can you just describe a little bit what that looked like?
I was a phone volunteer, and we used to take phone calls, and we also used to take instant messaging, which, funnily enough, most of our traffic came through instant messaging.
Really?
It was about, I think, 60 or 70% people would IM rather than wanting to phone.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And,
I think having quite a young user base definitely meant that people felt more comfortable IMing a lot of the time.
And so would they be asking for advice or what kind of things came through there?
So it was lots of different things. We were in quite a good position in that basically we weren't allowed to give advice, which in some ways sometimes made the job a lot easier, because if people wanted advice about relationships or about like you could give someone information if they wanted information about something. So, for example, what is my college counselling service? What is where can I get this? What charity can help me with this? Like, we could give information, but we can't give advice.
Right. Makes sense.
So it was great a lot of the time. But for example, obviously a proportion of our calls were suicide, essentially, like people who were kind of on the edge, on the brink. Or who were really thinking about something, and we weren't allowed to tell them not to. Our official policy is that we don't give advice. There were a number of reasons for that, though, and I actually think it's a very effective policy. So, essentially, when someone calls you and talks to you about that, it might be the first time they're talking to someone about it, and it might be something that they've spoken to a lot about with their family and friends, but their family and friends all the time, whenever they say it, are like, don't do that, no, don't do that, and they never actually get to have a conversation about it. So a lot of the time, it might be the first time they actually get to have a conversation about how they're feeling, and kind of they've never had people ask before, okay, so do you have a plan? What do you think will happen if you do it? Like, what do you think of the different outcomes here? And a lot of the time it can actually be very therapeutic for someone to have that conversation. Obviously there's a proportion of the time where that doesn't work. But also, I think as much as possible, obviously, if you can stop someone from killing themselves, that's usually the right thing. But also, it takes that person's choice away from them. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's an option. You have to treat it like a valid option for the caller, because that's the only way they can talk themselves through it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I'm asking is what I'm always curious about is I don't have a lot of experience with actual one-on-one psychologists, right? I've never really had a session or anything, and so in being helpful myself for the people around me, which is obviously not the same as at all the same. But what I'm curious about is to what extent is it just like you just mentioned, listening and having a conversation, which I feel like very often for a lot of people makes them feel better. Just literally listening, acknowledging, understanding. And to what extent is it actually giving advice, being a psychologist?
Oh, it's a good question. So I think it depends on who you are. Depends on what kind of psychologist you are, because I think there's a lot of distinctions. So for example, someone like a therapist or a counselor, a lot of the time that is just about listening. That's just about kind of having someone kind of unload and then maybe giving some general advice, or kind of employing some techniques. But a lot of the time it's just about letting someone unload. If you're a clinical psychologist, then that's about being trained in evidence-based techniques that will help someone to kind of help someone and give them the techniques to help themselves out of whatever it is that's happening to them, or help themselves improve their quality of life. Or reduce their symptoms. So for example, if you're a clinical psychologist and you're using something like cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of that will be about, for example, looking at evidence for thoughts, looking at, so what are the things about this thought that are true? Like, are there things that contradict this thought? Things like behavioral activation, which is, it's a lot about making plans for, so what are you going to do this week? What are you going to do because obviously a lot of the, for something like low mood or depression, a lot of the time people will just stop doing things because they don't feel like they want to, and they're like, oh, well, I have no motivation, so I'm not going to do it. So in CBT, a lot of it is kind of behavioral activation, getting people to go back to doing the things that they liked. Even though they don't like them that much right now, they'll probably start to like them more as they keep doing them. And then also exposure therapy, which is a big part of which can be a big part of CBT. So exposing people to situations that make them anxious or afraid, and looking at what actually happened versus the expectation. So all of that is, and that's just one type of therapy that clinical psychologists are trained in. That's the main evidence-based one in the UK that gets used. But yeah, so clinical psychologists have a much higher level of training, so it's much more than just kind of like unloading onto someone, I guess. In fact, a lot of the time you actually want to encourage against that, because like if someone spends an hour talking about their week, I mean it's helpful to an extent, but it's not actually helping. It's they're not making any progress from it. Like things aren't going to be different. So a lot of the times as a psychologist, you kind of have to fight against that to an extent, or find a way to like make it helpful. So
the other question I had about that, just to follow up on it, is it seems like there's indeed a certain amount of things which are in the book, so to say. So like I just hear you discuss some kind of frameworks that you can use and can be trained in. So to what extent is it then still kind of like just someone's talent in being a specific type of person, and to what extent is it those frameworks that are going to help someone? Is there a lot of variance in the application of the techniques in that sense?
I think it would really depend who you speak to. Depends who you ask. But
asking Rachel,
I think for a clinical psychologist, I think I think to an extent, I think the job does attract a particular type of person. Like, at the end of the day, you're in the job. I mean, it's one of those things that you're encouraged not to say during an interview, but at the end of the day, everyone is in the job because they sort of want to help people. Or, like, that's one of the reasons. They want to make people feel better. Like, there is some part of them...
why are you not supposed to say that, actually?
Because it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer. And it's not... Yeah, we're not really encouraged to say it in interviews, because it's a bit... As well, it shows... There's a way of saying it that's okay, but it can show a lack of realism as well, because a lot of the time as a psychologist, maybe you might be able to make some positive improvements, but sometimes you won't. Sometimes people's lives won't be better because you're in them, and like you need to be able to manage that as a psychologist. So I guess it does attract a certain. Say it again.
I never thought about it that way, that that you wouldn't be able to say that, because if I would think about doing psychology, it's the first thing I would think about.
Yeah, I think, well, that's the thing, like, it's so valid. It's completely valid to want to help people and to want to make people better, but a lot of the times as a psychologist, you actually can't make people better. And also, no, you know what? You can never make people better. Only people can make themselves better with your help, but you cannot fix someone. Like, it's just not, that's not a thing. But you can help someone help themselves. So I guess it's about having that that idea in your head rather than I just want to help people feel better, because you can't fix people. So I guess, which like, I mean, it's a little bit of a bummer to say it out loud, but like, it's something that you very much have to grapple with as a psychologist. But yeah, so I guess there's that side of it. There's the fact that it does attract a certain type of person, and also a lot of the time that person will they will be someone who their friends go to. They will be very practiced at kind of their active listening, you know, like those basic skills of you know, like helping people talk things through. But just that alone doesn't make a psychologist.
Yeah, you need the training and
yeah.
Exactly.
Also, that's what we're finding more and more now, especially in the NHS, is that's only a very small part of what psychologists do. So what psychologists do in the therapy room is obviously important, and it's something they're very good at, but there's a number of other things that that they do. So, for example, things like research into practice. Everything that we do in services should be evidence-based, and psychologists are the ones who need to do that research. Also leadership, so psychologists are the ones who are leading teams, or I don't know, it's, you know, it's coming from a psychologist, but should be the ones leading teams because they have the best evidence base for their treatments. And yeah, just kind of and also like helping their teams, because or the way it is in the NHS, a lot of the time you don't get a whole team of psychologists. So you've got like 2 psychologists in a team, in a whole team. And then the rest of the team will be maybe nurses, occupational therapists, maybe a psychiatrist. And psychologists can provide a lot of unique perspectives on kind of formulating someone's difficulties and kind of having a full picture of someone's difficulties that other disciplines don't have. So they have to kind of lead in that way as well. So yeah, I guess in that way, being a psychologist is much more than just the being in the room with a service user, you know?
Exactly. I think it's a good moment to switch topics a little bit and talk about your favorite topic.
Oh, stop. My favorite thing to talk about. COVID-19.
Which is? No.
No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I appreciate everyone that's doing so much for it right now, but I really think I have nothing interesting to say.
I agree.
Yeah. I have nothing interesting to say about it either, so I shouldn't probably.
I too have nothing. I have nothing to contribute except a wealth of memes. But yeah, those aren't relevant.
Yeah,
you have to be able to see them. It wouldn't be funny if I described them.
Yeah, I mean, it could be funny because it's funny how you try so hard, but then it's not funny, and that is humor in itself.
Yeah.
Anyways,
there's always that. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to talk about weightlifting, because that's something that when we knew each other wasn't a thing, and then at some point I saw you lifting heavy weights, and I was like, and we didn't talk for like a year or two, and then we talked again, and this was all you were talking about. So I want to hear the story there. I want to unpack it.
Oh, well, let me tell you. Oh, gather round, everybody. So this was, in my first year of college, I was going out with this greasy ass Texan boy, and then he cheated on me, and it was terrible. It was like the worst time of my life. But I kept running into it. So he had this friend, and I kept running into her outside of the gym, because at that time I was going to the gym. I was doing like I don't know what I would call like bog standard gym stuff. So like a bit of cardio and then some of the machines. But she was going to the gym and she was doing, well, she was actually an Olympic weightlifter. So she was doing things like the clean and jerk and the snatch. Just quick weightlifting 101 just before I start. So there's Olympic weightlifting, which doesn't mean that you go to the Olympics. It means that you do the 2 Olympic lifts, which are the clean and jerk and the snatch. Those are both the overhead movements. And then there's powerlifting. So powerlifting is the squat, bench, and deadlift, and that's what I do. Weightlifting can refer to both. When I hear weightlifting, I think Olympic weightlifting, but weightlifting can encompass both of those things and more.
So powerlifting is squats, deadlifts, and bench press.
Yeah, yeah. So
okay, good. Yeah, gotcha.
So I met her, and she was an Olympic weightlifter, but she was doing a lot of stuff like she was still squatting a lot and doing that sort of thing. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. This seems like a cool thing. And then the powerlifting society at my university was just getting off the ground. Trinity Barbell, whoop whoop, and they had an all-female powerlifting group that they were going to run out at a gym called Revolution Fitness, which is out in North Dublin. It is a banging gym, would recommend it to anyone. And we had an amazing coach, Sarah, and I started going, and I've never looked back since then, frankly. So that was kind of September of 2016. So I was just sort of starting to I was really on the upward trajectory of recovering. Started lifting weights, and then did my first competition in January 2017 and just caught the bug. There is something about being on a platform in front of a load of people who are screaming at you, trying to lift something off the ground. It is so much fun. It is really and I think that the thing about it was I realized you don't have to be strong to start with, because I was not. I'd lost a fair bit of weight anyway at that time, so I was 58 kilos. I was a little twig. I was so skinny. When I look back at photographs of myself from when I was a teenager, I'm like, wow, she was so skinny. Just such a tiny little twiglet. And so now I weigh a juicy 70 kilos. I've gone up 2 weight classes, and it's great. I love it. It's the best high. For me, it's the best high there is. So yeah. And I just haven't looked back. That's
awesome. So is the training part and the performing the competition part? I mean, you started with the training part, and there you got into it. What do you think that makes you so into it? Is it the physical experience? Is it the feeling of growth that you get from getting heavier every time or going heavier?
It's one of the things I really love about it is that it's not about losing weight or about burning calories. Frankly, you barely burn any calories on a powerlifting session. Maybe if you do a bit of cardio afterwards, you might, but you don't really burn any calories. But you get to see yourself lift more and more. And that's a buzz. The feeling of, especially even just being able to deadlift your body weight isn't it's not that much of an achievement, but it feels like the first time you do it, it's such a big achievement and it's such a high. Or when you're in the gym and you're loading up your deadlift bar and some gross ass man looks across at you she's not gonna lift that, and you load up nearly twice his weight and then pick it up off the ground and then just look him dead in the eye. There's nothing like that. Also just seeing your body change as well. I think a lot of the time there's this huge misconception that if you're a woman, you'll get really manly if you lift weights. That's not true. If you take steroids, you'll get really manly.
Still haven't got a mustache then. Yeah.
This is it. I am not experiencing any mustache. In fact, I'd like more mustache. Imagine I could grow it out. It would be so good. But yeah, so But yeah, your body will change, but in such amazing ways. To be fair, it's really hard for me to get trousers now. It's honestly, because my quads are so much bigger in proportion to the rest of my body. It's really hard to get jeans.
Yeah.
And there was a summer where suddenly none of my dresses fit me anymore because my back muscles were too big to zip up over them. Yeah, it was amazing and it was so great, but also it was so sad because I suddenly had to buy all new dresses. Yeah, so it's kind of, in some way it's frustrating, but also like when I look at the way I'm built now, I feel so happy. Like, so yeah, there's that part of it, but the aesthetic part of it is only ever very small for me. Like, I didn't come into this sport wanting my body to look a certain way. I just wanted to pick up heavy shit and put it back down. Like, that's literally, that's the pleasure of it. I feel like it's almost like an animal Neanderthal thing where it's just like, pick up heavy thing, put down. Like, feels good. Like, just, it feels good to be strong. Like, it feels good when I come home and, like, I come back to my parents' house and they're like, we have something we need you to move for us. We've been waiting for you to come home so you can move it. And I'm like, worry not, mother. I will move that for you right now. Like, yeah, it's great. It just feels great. Yeah. Also, I think on a kind of micro level, when you're doing the reps, like, and there's just you and your music, just, it's meditative in a way. It's like you breathe, like do your inhale, do your rep, you're counting, you're breathing and counting. Like, yeah, that can be really nice. Also, I think there's a great team aspect to powerlifting as well, which people don't think about. A lot of the time you'll do it at a powerlifting gym or as part of a university club. Like, those are some of the best experiences of my life, being part of a club, and the people I've met because of powerlifting has just been really life-changing. So lots of things. So like lots of things I love about it. Yeah. It's weird. A lot of people kind of, they're like, oh, it must be really scary. It must just be loads of like huge men. And I'm like, no, that's not what powerlifting's like at all. Powerlifting is one of the most, like, people are so sporting in it. Like, most people are a really good sport. Like, they just want to see you pick up the thing. Like, everyone, like, it doesn't matter who you are. Like, when you're at a powerlifting like competition, even people who don't know you will cheer for you. Everyone will just cheer for you. Like, especially if you're like, you're having to grind out a deadlift or something, everyone will be screaming at you to get it. Like, everyone just wants to see each other do well, and I think there's such a beauty in that.
That's so good. So I always kind of put sports on a continuum of kind of like two extremes, and one is the kind of sport for which you can mostly use your smarts and techniques. So for me, sports in that category are things like probably skiing, maybe to a certain extent skateboarding, and then on the other side there's the kind of things which require way more from your body rather than just your kind of talent in how you move, etc. So in my mind, categories there is things like how flexible you are, probably running, but also deadlifting in my mind is kind of there. But I may be wrong. Maybe there's a lot more kind of compared to just having strength that you need for it. Maybe
it's really interesting you should say that, because so I think that between the three lifts, there's a variation on how technical they are. So, for example, I'm not sure which I'd argue which is the most technical, but bench and squat are both incredibly technical lifts. And the squat is an incredibly mental lift because you've got this thing on your back, and usually, like, if you're in competition, it will feel too heavy. It will feel like you're not, you will pick it up off the rack and you'll be like, I am not going to be able to do this. And like, but most of the time you actually can, you're just not sure if you can. Whereas deadlift is, it's, in some ways it's the easiest lift to do because you just pick the thing up. But a deadlift done wrong can hurt you almost more than a squat or a bench done wrong. Like, the majority, I think, of powerlifting injuries, there aren't many. It's actually a very low injury rate in the sport. But I think the most injuries are probably from deadlift. Because there's actually a lot that can go wrong with it, and a lot of kind of serious things that can go wrong. So things with maybe, like, you've got your back basically. Your whole back and glutes and hamstrings are at risk. And then stuff like your biceps and your fingers, your wrists, like it's all to play for with those. And so I think, yeah, anyone can do a bad deadlift, like can do a deadlift that looks ugly as hell. Like even me, like, okay, so before I came to my current coach, my deadlift was so ugly. Like, and when I look back at it, I'm like, wow, I really let myself go.
Wow, yeah.
And I could have done myself a real injury doing that. And, you know, I think to an extent, something one of my old coaches used to say was like, you don't get any points for pretty in a competition. And I agree. Like, you don't get any points for how nice your lift looks. It's just whether you do it or not. But also, there are ways of keeping yourself safe and ensuring your longevity in the sport that... Yeah, so for a deadlift, I think a lot of the time people think that you don't have to think about technique, but you do. Like, I'd say I agree with you that to an extent it is mostly raw power. So like out of the three lifts, it's the one that you can most, like, so for a squat and a deadlift, you don't want to come out onto the platform blind with rage, like screaming, ready, like
your chest,
literally, like beating your chest, like because you need to keep a level head, you need to be able to think about what you're doing. Whereas for a deadlift, like you see it in competition all the time, people come out I come out onto the platform for a deadlift, especially like a third deadlift, screaming my head off. Like I've just had a face full of ammonia, I've been smacked on the back, like so there's just clouds of chalk coming off me, and like I'm gonna scream my head off pretty much for that whole lift. So it's the lift that you can do that the most for.
I've seen it. I love it.
It's so good. Honestly, there's nothing like it. Like and you know, I think I actually attribute, because sometimes people are like, wow, you seem really like calm and level-headed all the time. I'm like, that's because I have somewhere where I get out all of my rage. Like that's where all my negative emotions go. They all go into lifting, and that's where that's a lot of where I manage my negative emotions. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's so much fun. I'd recommend it to anyone. Just give it a go.
So, do you think that when you progress, you need a one-on-one coach, or do you think that YouTube videos will suffice if you take the time to look up the right ones? Because that's more of a question really just for me, because I'm the guy who always goes to YouTube and never gets a life coach.
Yeah, well, I think it depends what you want to do. I think if you're not interested in being a serious, like, if you're not interested in competing seriously, then I wouldn't spend, or I'd only spend a very little amount of money on a coach. I wouldn't spend a lot of money. I think there's always a benefit of a coach, but even within coaches, I mean, you say, you know, within YouTube videos that, you know, you got to find the right ones, but also with coaches, that's the case. Like I've had a wide, like, I mean, I've had maybe 4 or 5 coaches now, and they've all had different strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So, and also there are some coaches who really don't know what they're doing as well. It's a bit like PTs. Like, to become a PT, you don't actually need that much of a qualification. Anyone can be a PT nowadays. And they actually...
PT being personal trainer, right?
Yes, personal trainers. Anyone can be a personal trainer nowadays. And a good number of those don't actually... Well, they know a lot about a few things, but they don't know anything about powerlifting.
Yeah, this is for me a frustrating thing in general, like the amount of coaches and trainers popping up that have so little experience and knowledge and still call themselves a certain way, take money from people, and yeah, this is one of my big time frustrations. I get I'm actually scared to get coaches and things like that, because very often in different places, I don't even know how to know if someone is qualified or not anymore.
It's funny, it kind of, to bring us back, it kind of reminds me of the same thing in psychology, because therapist is not a protected term. Anyone can slap the word therapist on their door and do whatever they want. There's no regulation of that. Yeah. And, you know, and I think this, you know, I see the same, it's the same thing in the fitness industry. Like, and there's so many people who are like PTs, or who are like, oh, I'm a coach now. And you're like, yeah, but what is your experience? So yeah, I agree. I think it can be really scary because you don't know who to trust. I guess my advice on that would be, It depends what you want, what you're trying to achieve. So if you want general fitness, I'd recommend going to a gym. Like go to a gym, see who they recommend, and then check that person out. Like ask them what their qualifications are. In the same way, the same thing I'd say in a first therapy session would be the same thing I'd recommend in a first consultation with a PT, which is ask them what their qualifications are. Look up their qualifications. Like if someone's like, oh yeah,
look
I'm
up what
a PT.
they mean.
Yeah, look up what they mean. Look up what the training is for that. Like, and also like if you can say, hey, are there any of your other clients who I can speak to? Also know that you know that you're also paying for a service. So if at a certain point you're like, no, I don't like the way this person works, you can stop working with them. It feels awkward to do, but in the same way, I always put it in the same way you wouldn't stay with a bad hairdresser. You wouldn't go back to someone if they gave you a bad haircut. So why would you go back to either a fitness coach who you're not happy with the way that they do things, or a psychologist who you're not happy with the way they're doing things?
Yeah. I guess the hard part is that in both of these cases there's a certain amount of uncertainty that takes place. Like when it comes to mental health, for instance, I feel like it's quite hard sometimes to assess whether or not the person has done anything very beneficial, or whether or not it was maybe just you or your circumstances or anything else. But do you maybe have any... I know you read a lot, and I love talking about books because I love reading. Are there any books that you've read in the past year that you would recommend?
Oh, good question.
I know that's a big one, but...
Lots. So many. So I read a really amazing book called The Choice by Edith Eger, I think her name is. That is about a psychologist. Yeah. It's about a psychologist who she's an Auschwitz survivor.
Wow.
And that was amazing. And that also resonated with me in a lot of the ways that she conducts her therapy. She has this amazing kind of philosophy about like she's right, the only thing in life you can do is choose how you respond to it. And I think that resonates in a lot of the work that I'd want to do as a psychologist. So I guess that. On a completely different note, there's a book called Humble Pie by Matt Parker. Matt Parker,
Humble Pie. Okay.
Yeah, it's a maths book. It's about maths.
Okay.
And it's about maths mistakes that people have made, and it just makes me laugh. And if you're a bit of a nerd, like I am, it's really funny. Great book.
Is it a very illustrated book, or is it also good? Would it also be good in audio?
You could definitely listen to it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's fine. It's fine to listen to. And I guess I'll just do one more. So I guess my other one would be, I've got to recommend The Boy, the Horse, the Fox and the Mole. You know about this book. I sent it to you for your birthday.
You gave it to me. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. It found me at a good time.
It found me at a good time as well. It's mostly illustrated, and it's about life and about relationships and about lots of things, but it's got some beautiful drawings in it, and it honestly, like from the first page, I just cried for the whole book, but in a really good way. So yeah, it will make you feel things, but hopefully in a good way, I think. Yeah, so I guess those would be the ones for the moment that would come to mind anyway. I've read lots of books this year, but... Yeah.
I'll put them for sure in the show notes so people can have a look.
Yeah, do.
Before wrapping up, is there anything you'd like to say to whoever's listening at this point? That kind of like a billboard message, maybe, the kind of thing that people can take away?
I'd say fill your life up with things that you love, I guess. Like don't use them to distract you from your feelings, but make sure that you've got lots of like wholesome shit going on for you. Like, find, I mean, powerlifting is my exercise, but like find an exercise that you love. Like, and I think when people think about exercise, they just think about like running or football, and I'm like, that's such a small population. So I know, like, for you, Yap, it's been kite surfing has been the thing
big
that's
time.
really changed your life. So, you know, like climbing, dance, like go to a fucking dance studio, like find a form of exercise that really like brings you joy, and just like fill your life with things that you love. Like, you don't have, if there are relationships that are like bringing you down or aren't a net positive in your life, then just like, it sounds so cheesy, but just like, don't waste time. Like, go and find things that spark joy, you know, as Marie Kondo would say.
Exactly. Okay, so if people would want to connect with you, where are you on the world of the internets?
Oh, well, so I guess you can put it in the share notes. If it's a professional thing, then I've got a LinkedIn. If it's for fun and for banter, then I've got an Instagram page. It's called Barbells and Brains.
Barbells
95.
and Brains.
And it's a private page, but yeah, like I'm not too discerning. It's mostly just so people who I really don't want to see it can't see it.
Right.
So I'm on that. And I'm
LinkedIn or Instagram.
You probably won't be able to find me on the Facebook because I've got it locked down pretty tight. But yeah, just the Instagrams or the LinkedIns, whatever you like. Yeah.
Right, Rachel, it has been an absolute honor having you as my first podcast guest for Monocle Moments.
It was an honor to be chosen.
You're the
also
chosen one.
Yeah, just nice to hang out and chat as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that was it. The first ever episode of Monocle Moments. I'd love to hear your comments on what you thought of that first episode. Feel free to reach out to Rachel. You can also follow me on the socials. So you usually find me under the name Jaap van Beek. But you can also look at my website, jamesmonocle.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at JaapJoaap. That is JAPIOAAP. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully see you in the next episode.